The night shift at the new Bronx Community Clinic was supposed to be safe. It had been exactly 6 months since Latoya watched Seung-Jin Choi die on a dirty warehouse floor. But when the automatic glass door slid open, the cold rain blew in a ghost. Latoya dropped her clipboard, the plastic cracking loudly against the floor. The tall man in the dripping black leather coat slowly turned around. He reached up and unbuttoned his wet shirt, revealing a massive, jagged surgical scar right over his heart. Seung-Jin stepped forward, his new heart beating loud and steady in the quiet room. "They fixed my heart, Latoya," he whispered, his eyes full of fear. "But yours is in danger. We have to run right now." Latoya pressed her shaking hand against his chest, completely frozen. He was warm. He was alive. Seung-Jin quickly explained the impossible truth. When he took that bullet 6 months ago, Agent Martinez and the FBI dragged his body out the back doors before the police arrived. They faked his official death report to trick the underworld. Then, they used his secret immunity deal to fly him to a hidden black market hospital, giving him a brand new heart paid for with his own seized mafia money. He was supposed to stay a ghost on a quiet island forever. But a new monster was coming to New York. Madame Baek, the ruthless white dragon from Seoul who secretly funded Minsu's army, had crossed the ocean to collect her debt. And she knew a terrifying secret. Latoya's new clinic was built directly on top of the Choi family's master underground vault. Seung-Jin broke his FBI deal and threw away his freedom to come back for the nurse who saved his soul. This is part 2 of the story. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, go watch it first. You'll need it to truly feel the twists, tension, and emotional impact of what happens next. If you want to see how a dead king and a brave nurse fight an international army, hit that subscribe button right now because the next 60 seconds will blow your mind. Tires screamed against the pavement outside the clinic. 3 giant black SUVs smashed through the heavy iron gates like they were made of paper. Glass shattered everywhere as armed men in dark suits poured out of the vehicles. Seung-Jin grabbed Latoya's arm with a grip like steel. "We have to go now," he yelled over the sound of shouting. Latoya's heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. She followed him down the dark hallway, leaving behind her quiet life. Seung-Jin kicked open a heavy metal grate at the back of the building. An awful, damp smell rushed up to meet them. It was an old storm drain. Rainwater rushed loudly in the darkness below. "Climb down." "Hurry," he ordered. Latoya didn't argue. She gripped the cold, rusty ladder and climbed into the deep shadows. Seung-Jin pulled the heavy metal cover shut right over their heads just in time. Seconds later, they heard the heavy boots of the armed men stomping on the metal right above them. They were safe for a moment, but the terrifying chase had just begun. They were trapped in the dark, and the only way to go was deeper into the wet tunnels. The tunnel was freezing and the air was thick with the smell of old rain. Dirty water splashed against their ankles with every step they took into the dark. When they finally found a dry spot to rest, the quiet settled heavily around them. Latoya turned to look at Seung-Jin in the dim light of his small flashlight. Her hands were shaking with a mix of fear and confusion. Without warning, she balled her fists and punched him hard in the chest. "Ow," he grunted, stepping back in surprise. "You were dead," she screamed, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She hit him again, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "I went to your funeral. I cried for months because of you." Seung-Jin did not fight back or try to block her. He just looked at her with sad, tired eyes. "I know," he whispered softly. "I am so sorry, Latoya. I had to fake my death to keep you away from these bad people." She collapsed against his chest, sobbing into his wet jacket. He was really alive. She felt his strong heartbeat against her cheek, feeling both angry and relieved. They walked for another hour through the maze of pipes before the tunnel opened up. An old, abandoned subway car sat quietly on a forgotten track covered in dust. Inside, the car was surprisingly warm and lit by several battery-powered lamps. There were thick blankets, stacks of canned food, and a small radio. This was Seung-Jin's secret safe house. Latoya fell onto a dusty seat, her legs feeling like jelly. Suddenly, a terrible thought struck her heart like a bolt of lightning. Marcus. She gasped, grabbing her cell phone from her pocket. Her younger brother was at home all alone. Her hands trembled as she dialed his number, praying he would pick up. The phone rang once, twice, and then a third time. Finally, Marcus answered. "Hello? Latoya," he said, sounding sleepy and confused. "Marcus, listen to me," Latoya said quickly. "You need to leave the house right now." Before she could finish her sentence, she heard a loud, violent crash on the other end. Men were shouting in the distance. "Latoya? Who are these guys?" Marcus yelled in terror. Then, the line went totally dead. Latoya stared at the silent screen. Back at the clinic, the armed men stood in a line. A sleek, black car pulled up to the curb, and Beek stepped out slowly. Her expensive heels clicked sharply on the broken glass covering the floor. She walked into the empty clinic with a face as cold as a winter morning. She hated losing more than anything else in the world. She looked around the messy room and spotted a framed piece of paper hanging on the wall. It was Latoya's nursing degree, the thing she had worked so hard to earn over many years. Beek smiled a cruel, thin smile that did not reach her eyes. She reached into her dark coat and pulled out a solid gold lighter. With a sharp flick of her thumb, a bright orange flame popped up. She held the fire to the corner of the paper. The degree caught fire quickly, turning black and curling into gray ashes inside the frame. "Find them," Beek whispered to the guards standing behind her. She dropped the burning frame onto the floor and crushed it with her shoe. "Burn their whole world down. This is war now." They needed money to find and save Marcus, and they needed it fast. Seung-Jin knew only one place to get quick cash, a local mafia stash house hidden in the city. They stood in the dark alley behind the building, watching the guards. Latoya pointed to a heavy black pistol sitting on top of a trash can. "Take it," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You need to protect yourself." Seung-Jin shook his head firmly and pushed the gun away. "No. If I start using those, I become just like the monsters we are fighting," he said. "I have to keep my soul clean." He stepped out of the shadows into the light. Two large guards rushed at him with their fists raised. Seung-Jin moved like lightning. He dodged a wild punch and shoved the first man hard into the brick wall. The second guard tried to tackle him, but Seung-Jin grabbed his arm and flipped him onto the hard concrete. He fought with empty hands, using only his speed and his strength. In less than a minute, both guards were unconscious on the ground. The cash was finally theirs to take. The cheap motel room smelled like stale smoke and old dust. Rain beat heavily against the single, cracked window, making a lonely sound. Latoya sat on the edge of the sagging bed, holding a damp washcloth. Seung-Jin sat beside her, slowly taking off his wet, torn shirt. For the first time, Latoya saw the deep, jagged scars stretching across his ribs and chest. They were brutal marks from past surgeries and terrible fights that he had never talked about. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked at his skin. She had always seen him as a tough, untouchable leader who never showed any pain. Now, looking at his bruised body, she realized how human and fragile he truly was. With gentle hands, she carefully wiped the dirt and dried blood from his tired shoulders. He flinched slightly when the cool cloth touched a fresh cut on his side. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice soft in the quiet room. "It is okay," he replied, looking down at her kind hands. He did not pull away from her touch this time. In that small, dingy room, the walls between them started to crumble. He was no longer a scary boss, and she was no longer just a frightened nurse. They were just two people surviving a long night together. The heavy silence in the motel room suddenly felt different. It was no longer filled with fear, but with a quiet and warm understanding. Latoya looked up from his scars and met his dark, intense eyes. All the tension from the past few days seemed to melt away in that single, long look. Seung-Jin slowly reached out and gently touched her cheek, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. His rough hand was surprisingly warm and very tender against her skin. Latoya leaned into his touch, her heart beating a fast, steady rhythm in her chest. The invisible line that kept them apart as a boss and a worker was completely gone now. They were true equals, sharing the same dangerous world and the same desperate hopes for the future. He leaned in closer, and she met him halfway, without any hesitation. Their kiss was soft at first, then deep and full of many unspoken promises. They held onto each other tightly, finding comfort in the middle of a terrible nightmare. For a few precious hours, they forgot about the hitmen and the running. They only thought about the strong bond growing between them. They were now partners, ready to fight for each other until the very end of the road. Their sweet moment of peace did not last nearly long enough. Just as Latoya rested her head against Seung-Jin's strong shoulder, a terrifying noise shattered the quiet. Heavy boots stomped loudly in the hallway right outside their thin door. Before either of them could move, the flimsy wooden door exploded inward with a deafening crash. Splinters of wood flew everywhere like tiny, sharp daggers. 3 large men dressed in dark tactical gear stood in the doorway. They were Marion's heavily armed mercenaries, holding large black rifles pointed straight at the bed. "Nobody move an inch," the leader barked, stepping into the small room. His eyes were cold and cruel, like a hungry wolf. Seung-Jin reacted with lightning speed. He grabbed the heavy wooden nightstand and hurled it directly at the leader's chest. The man stumbled backward, his gun firing wildly into the white ceiling. Plaster rained down on them like snow. "Out the window! Go!" Seung-Jin yelled, pulling Latoya up by her hand. He smashed the motel window with a heavy chair, sending glass flying into the wet parking lot. They dove through the broken frame just as more bullets tore through the walls behind them. The nightmare had finally found them again. They landed hard on the wet pavement outside the motel. Seung-Jin quickly spotted a silver car running in the parking lot, its owner grabbing ice from a machine nearby. Latoya sprinted to the driver's side and jumped behind the wheel before anyone could stop her. Seung-Jin slid into the passenger seat just as the mercenaries burst out of the broken motel window behind them. Latoya slammed her foot on the gas pedal as hard as she could. The tires spun wildly on the wet ground before catching the road, shooting the car forward into the rainy night. 2 dark SUVs quickly appeared in their rearview mirror, roaring loudly as they chased them toward Manhattan. Latoya gripped the steering wheel tightly with both hands. Growing up in the Bronx, she knew these busy city streets better than anyone else. "Hold on tight," she yelled over the engine. She jerked the wheel hard, taking a sharp turn down a narrow, trash-filled alley. The pursuing cars struggled to keep up with her fast moves. She sped through red lights, dodged slow yellow taxis, and zoomed down tight one-way streets in the wrong direction. Her quick thinking and fearless driving kept them just one step ahead of the flying bullets. Latoya finally parked the stolen car in a dark, empty lot near a rundown apartment building. They had tracked her brother's phone signal to this exact spot. They rushed up the dirty stairs to the 3rd floor and knocked on a peeling green door. Marcus opened it slowly, holding a heavy wooden baseball bat tightly in his hands. When he saw Latoya, he dropped the bat and hugged her tightly. But then he looked over her shoulder and froze completely. His eyes grew wide with pure shock and sudden, burning anger. He recognized the man standing in the shadows immediately. "What is he doing here?" Marcus yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Seung-Jin. "The news said he was dead. Everyone said he was gone." Latoya stepped between them, holding her hands up to try and calm him down. "Marcus, please listen to me. He saved my life," she pleaded. Marcus shook his head furiously, his face turning bright red with rage. "He is a mafia boss, Latoya. He brings nothing but danger and death wherever he goes." Marcus backed away toward the kitchen counter, reaching for a cell phone. "I am calling the cops right now," he threatened, his voice shaking with fear. "We cannot trust him at all." Marcus stared fiercely at Seung-Jin, his thumb hovering over the green call button on his cell phone. The tiny apartment was completely silent except for the heavy rain beating against the dirty glass window. Latoya stepped closer to Seung-Jin, placing a gentle hand on his broad chest. She did not say a single word, but the soft, desperate look in her brown eyes spoke volumes to her brother. Seung-Jin looked down at her, and his dark, dangerous eyes instantly softened into something kind. In that brief moment, Marcus saw something he never expected from a ruthless mafia boss. He saw pure, undeniable love. Seung-Jin was clearly willing to die just to keep Latoya completely safe from harm. Slowly, Marcus lowered his phone and let out a long, heavy sigh. "Fine," he muttered, shaking his head in total disbelief. "But if you ever hurt my sister, I will surely finish the job your enemies started." Seung-Jin gave a slow, respectful nod of agreement. Marcus walked over to his cluttered desk and booted up his glowing computer monitors. His fast fingers began to fly across the dark keyboard. He was a brilliant computer genius. "If we want to survive," Marcus said, "I really need to hack into Mariong's private communication network right now." While Marcus typed furiously away at his glowing screens, Seung-Jin walked into the narrow kitchen to think. He needed to find a safe way to finally end this terrible nightmare using the law. He pulled out a highly secure, untraceable phone from his dark leather jacket. He dialed a secret number he had memorized long ago during his time in the underworld. It belonged to Special Agent Martinez, one of the few honest men left in the local FBI office. Seung-Jin listened as the phone rang loudly in his ear, echoing against the quiet walls. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3 rings. Every single second felt like an hour of his life. Finally, the call connected, but no one spoke on the other end of the line. "Martinez, it is Seung-Jin," he whispered into the receiver. "I am still alive, and I need your help right now. Mariong has gone completely out of control. She is trying to destroy everything in her path to get power." There was only a chilling, empty static on the line. No friendly voice answered him or gave him hope. Seung-Jin felt a cold knot form tight in his stomach. Martinez always answered his phone on the very first ring. Something was terribly wrong here. Seung-Jin and Latoya arrived at the upscale apartment building in absolute, terrifying silence. The front door to Agent Martinez's home was already hanging wide open, completely off its heavy metal hinges. Latoya gasped and covered her mouth with her hand in sheer terror. The entire living room was completely and brutally destroyed. Broken furniture was thrown across the expensive wooden floor, and thick shards of glass covered the soft carpet. A large, terrifying pool of fresh blood stained the center of the dark room, but there was no body to be found anywhere. Seung-Jin stepped carefully over the sharp debris, his face turning pale and hard like stone. He noticed a shiny gold police badge resting gently on the broken coffee table. It was a clear, terrifying message meant just for him to see. Mariong had already reached the honest agent and finished him. She had used her endless supply of dirty money to buy off the local police force. There was absolutely no one left for them to trust in this entire corrupt city. The law could no longer save them from this endless nightmare. They were completely and utterly alone now. "We have to leave right now," Seung-Jin whispered, grabbing Latoya's shaking hand. With all other safe options completely gone, Seung-Jin drove them to the edge of dark Brooklyn. The old, abandoned warehouse loomed in the deep shadows like a massive, hungry ghost. It was the exact same building where the Mafia had tried to murder Seung-Jin just a few weeks ago. It was the place where he had officially died, in the terrible fire. The crumbling brick walls were still black from the heavy smoke, and the heavy metal roof was mostly collapsed inward. Marcus shivered as they stepped through the broken front doors into the creepy darkness. "This place gives me the absolute creeps," Marcus whispered, setting up his computer gear on an old, burnt shipping crate. Latoya stayed close to Seung-Jin, her eyes scanning the spooky shadows for any signs of hidden danger. "Nobody will ever look for a dead man in his own grave," Seung-Jin explained quietly, his voice echoing off the tall, empty walls. Marion believes this place is completely useless to us now. He pulled a heavy, dusty blanket over Latoya's shaking shoulders to keep out the bitter cold. In the middle of this dark, burnt graveyard, they finally had a brief moment to catch their tired breath and plan their next move. Inside the freezing, empty warehouse, Marcus stared at his bright laptop screen for hours. Code scrolled rapidly across the bright glass display as he worked. "I am in," he finally announced, his fingers typing quickly on the keys. He had finally cracked Marion's highly secure network. Latoya and Seung-Jin rushed over to look over his shoulder. Marcus opened a hidden file marked with a bright red warning label. His eyes grew wide with pure horror as he read the secret document. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice trembling with fear. "This is not just about the Mafia anymore. She is planning something huge and terrible for the whole city." Seung-Jin narrowed his dark eyes at the glowing screen. "What is it, Marcus? Tell us exactly what you see." Marcus pointed a shaking finger at a detailed map of the city. "Marion wants to access a massive underground bank vault hidden right beneath the Bronx. But the only way down there is through the old subway tunnels." He swallowed hard, his face turning white. "She has planted explosives everywhere. She is going to blow up our entire Bronx neighborhood tonight just to get the stolen money." Latoya gasped, thinking of all the innocent families living right above the bombs. Latoya knew they needed more information to stop the deadly explosions. She decided to take a massive, terrifying risk. Borrowing a crisp white coat and a stethoscope from an old friend, she disguised herself as a private doctor. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she walked into the grand lobby of Marion's luxury hotel. She kept her head down, trying to look calm and professional. The heavy golden doors of the elevator slid open, and she stepped inside, pressing the button for the top penthouse floor. Her hands were sweating so much she could barely hold her medical bag. When the doors opened again, two large guards in dark suits stared right at her. "I am the private physician," Latoya said, making her voice sound deep and strict. Madam Baek requested a health check immediately. The guards looked at each other, then slowly stepped aside to let her pass. Latoya walked into the massive, beautiful suite, completely alone in enemy territory. She had to move fast before Marion returned. Every single second felt like an hour as she searched the room for a good place to hide the tiny listening device. Latoya quickly slipped the tiny, black listening bug perfectly underneath a heavy marble table. She carefully smoothed out her white doctor's coat and hurried toward the heavy front door. Just as she grabbed the brass handle, she heard the terrifying sound of heavy boots marching down the outside hallway. She froze in pure panic. Peeking through the small peephole, her blood ran completely cold. 3 tall men with deadly tattoos covering their necks were walking right toward the suite. They were the White Dragon's top assassins, known for never leaving anyone alive. Latoya backed away from the door, her mind racing for a quick escape. She ran into the fancy bathroom and quietly opened the small window leading to the fire escape. As the suite door clicked unlocked, Latoya squeezed her body through the tight window frame. She held her breath, clinging to the cold iron stairs outside as the assassins stomped into the room. "The boss will be here soon," one of the men grunted loudly. Latoya did not wait to hear any more. She scrambled down the metal stairs as fast and as quietly as she could. Back in the freezing, dark warehouse, Marcus quickly connected his laptop to the hidden listening bug. Static hissed through the small speakers before a cold, familiar voice filled the room. It was Marion. "Are the packages in place?" she asked sharply over the device. A deep, gruff voice answered her immediately. "Yes, madam. The explosives are currently being placed along the main subway lines directly beneath the Bronx. The timer is set for exactly midnight." Latoya looked at the glowing digital clock on Marcus's computer screen. It was already 10 o'clock at night. They had less than 2 hours to stop the massive bombs from destroying their entire neighborhood. Panic gripped Latoya's throat like a tight fist. Thousands of innocent families were sleeping right above a deadly trap. Seung-Jin stood up slowly, his face pale but his dark eyes burning with fierce determination. "We have to split up right now to cover more ground," he ordered, grabbing his heavy leather jacket. "We are officially running out of time." Every passing minute brought the ticking bombs closer to exploding. It was a terrifying race against the clock to save their city. Before heading into the dark subway tunnels, Latoya needed one last piece of the puzzle. She rushed to the city prison to visit Marion's lieutenant, Minsu. He sat behind the thick glass window in a bright orange jumpsuit. He looked completely broken and exhausted, his proud shoulders slumped forward in defeat. He picked up the heavy black phone on his side of the glass. "Why are you here?" he mumbled quietly, not making eye contact. "Marion is going to blow up the Bronx tonight," Latoya said firmly into her own phone. Minsu slowly lifted his head, his eyes wide with sudden horror and deep sadness. He knew exactly how evil his Marion could be. A cruel guard yelled that visiting time was almost over. Minsu suddenly pressed a small, crumpled paper napkin against the thick glass before slipping it quickly through the metal slot at the bottom. Latoya grabbed it instantly. "She never leaves loose ends," he whispered fearfully before standing up to leave. Latoya unfolded the dirty napkin outside. It contained a secret code and a terrifying warning about Marion's absolute cruelty and hidden traps. They drove their stolen, rusty van toward the hidden subway entrance as fast as possible. The heavy rain continued to pour down, matching the terrible dread in their hearts. Suddenly, Seung-Jin let out a sharp, painful gasp. He grabbed his chest tightly, his face twisting in pure agony. The extreme, constant stress of the last few days was finally catching up to his body. His newly transplanted heart was starting to fail. "Seung-Jin!" Latoya screamed, slamming on the brakes. She threw the van into park and jumped into the back to help him. Seung-Jin collapsed heavily onto the metal floor, struggling hard to breathe. His skin was turning a scary shade of gray, and cold sweat dripped from his forehead. "My heart," he choked out, his voice weak and shaking. Latoya grabbed her medical bag, her hands trembling with fresh terror. She was a great nurse, but she knew she could not fix a failing organ in the back of a dirty van. The clock was ticking closer to midnight, the bombs were waiting, and the man she loved was currently dying right in front of her. Latoya's hands shook violently as she dug through her heavy medical bag in the back of the speeding van. Seung-Jin's dark eyes were rolling back, his breathing reduced to shallow, terrifying, wet gasps. Up front, Marcus slammed his foot on the gas pedal, weaving wildly through the heavy, dangerous city traffic. Horns blared loudly outside, but inside the van, the only sound was Seung-Jin's fading heartbeat. "Hold on, please," Latoya cried out. She grabbed the stolen portable defibrillator she had packed just in case. She quickly ripped open his shirt, exposing his chest and the angry surgical scars. Her heart pounded as she placed the cold metal pads directly over his failing, transplanted heart. "Marcus, keep driving fast," she yelled. The machine whined a high, terrifying pitch as it charged up. Latoya took a deep breath. "Clear," she shouted, pressing the button. His body jerked hard against the metal floor. The van hit a massive pothole, throwing Latoya against the side wall. She crawled back to him, pressing 2 fingers to his sweaty neck. A slow, steady pulse finally thumped against her skin. He took a huge, shaking breath and opened his dark eyes. They were still in the fight. The rusty van finally screeched to a halt half a block away from the Bronx medical clinic. The street, usually bustling with friendly neighbors and loud music, was completely dead and silent. Marcus peered carefully through the rain-streaked windshield. His eyes widened in absolute horror. The White Dragon's brutal army had completely taken over the small building. Heavily armed mercenaries in black tactical gear stood like dark statues at every single entrance. Through the broken front windows, Latoya could see terrified local residents huddled tightly together on the floor. Men, women, and even little children from her neighborhood were being held hostage at gunpoint. Baek stood proudly in the center of the room, her cruel smile visible even from a distance. She was using innocent people as human shields for her final, deadly confrontation. Seung-Jin sat up slowly, clutching his sore chest. His face was pale, but his jaw was set with fierce anger. She crossed the final line, he whispered, loading a heavy magazine into his weapon. Latoya looked at the terrified faces of her beloved neighbors. She felt a burning fire ignite deep in her stomach. They were not running away anymore. They were going to war. Before Seung-Jin could even open the van door, a loud click echoed in the small space. Latoya froze completely. She slowly turned her head and gasped in pure shock. Marcus was pointing a heavy black pistol directly at Seung-Jin's chest. His hands were shaking slightly, but his eyes were hard and cold. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Latoya screamed, reaching out to grab his arm. "Put the gun down right now." Marcus stepped back, keeping the dangerous weapon incredibly steady. "I am so sorry, Latoya," he said, his voice cracking with intense emotion. "I cannot let you both die tonight. I have to protect my own family first." He motioned with a gun toward the open van doors. "Get out and walk toward the clinic." Seung-Jin did not fight back. He simply raised his hands and stepped out into the pouring rain. Latoya cried hard, feeling her entire world shatter into tiny pieces. Her own brother had betrayed them to the enemy. Marcus marched them down the wet street, keeping the gun pointed at their backs. The heavily armed mercenaries at the clinic doors lowered their rifles and smiled cruelly as Marcus pushed his prisoners inside to face Baek. Inside the bright clinic, Baek laughed a cold, evil laugh. She walked slowly toward them, her expensive heels clicking loudly on the clean tile floor. "Well done, little boy," she sneered at Marcus. "You finally made a smart choice for your family." Believing she had completely won, signaled her heavily armed guards to lower their dangerous weapons and relax. She turned her back for just one single second to happily admire her grand victory. In that exact moment, the terrifying look in Marcus's eyes completely vanished. He instantly spun around, tossing the heavy black pistol directly into Seung-Jin's waiting hands. It was all a brilliant, fake trick. Marcus's betrayal was just a clever plan to get them right past the massive army and directly into the very heart of the clinic. With lightning speed, Seung-Jin knocked out the closest guard and aimed the gun perfectly at the deadly explosive strapped to the main vault door. "Nobody move," Seung-Jin roared, his deep voice shaking the entire room. Spun back around, her cruel smile immediately melting into pure rage and absolute shock. Latoya smiled brightly through her tired tears, incredibly proud of her brave brother. The fight truly began. glared furiously at the gun aimed at the vault. Her hands shook with anger, but then a sick, twisted smile slowly returned to her face. She reached into her dark coat and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers. "You think you have won, Seung-Jin?" she hissed like a snake. "You are just a dead man." She threw the papers hard onto the floor right in front of Latoya. "Look at the clinic deed you signed 6 months ago." yelled. Latoya cautiously picked up the documents. Her eyes quickly scanned the legal writing, and her breath caught sharply in her throat. This was not just a simple paper for the medical building. Hidden in the fine print was a massive, unbreakable legal transfer. Seung-Jin had secretly signed over his entire criminal empire, all his dirty money, and his massive power directly to Latoya. "He made you the head of the Choi family," revealed, her voice dripping with poison. "You are the boss of the underworld now, little nurse." Latoya stared at Seung-Jin in total disbelief. He had given her absolute control over everything they had, trusting her completely to finally end the terrible darkness for good. Beck stared at the legal papers in Latoya's shaking hands. Her beautiful face twisted into an ugly, hateful mask of rage. All her careful planning, All her dirty tricks and all her murders were completely ruined by a simple signature. Because Latoya was now the legal boss of the Choi family empire, Mariong could not steal the massive underground vault or the money. The law completely blocked her path. "You think a piece of paper can stop me?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the bright clinic walls. She stomped her expensive heel on the broken glass. "I do not care about the law anymore. I will just take it over your dead bodies right now." Mariong spun around to face her heavily armed guards. She pointed a sharp, angry finger directly at Latoya, Seung-Jin, and Marcus. "Kill them all right now," she ordered fiercely. "Leave no one alive in this building tonight." The dangerous mercenaries raised their heavy black rifles, aiming straight at their trapped targets. Latoya grabbed her brother's arm tightly, squeezing her eyes shut. Seung-Jin stepped bravely in front of them, ready to take the first deadly bullets to protect the woman he truly loved. Before the evil guards could pull their heavy triggers, a deafening roar shook the ground beneath their feet. The entire old building vibrated wildly. Suddenly, the solid brick wall of the medical clinic exploded completely inward. A massive cloud of gray dust and sharp debris filled the busy room. The terrified people screamed and covered their heads in terror. A giant, stolen city prison bus smashed right through the large hole, crushing two armed guards under its huge black tires. The heavy bus screeched to a sudden, violent stop in the middle of the ruined lobby. The loud, hissing metal doors slowly swung wide open. Through the thick smoke, a tall figure stepped out into the bright lights. It was Minsu, still wearing his bright orange prison jumpsuit. He'd just escaped from prison. His face was covered in dark dirt and sweat, but his eyes burned with intense anger. He raised a large, heavy rifle and aimed it directly at his commander's shocked soldiers. "Nobody move a single muscle," Minsu shouted loudly, his strong voice cutting through the thick dust. Latoya gasped loudly in total surprise and happy relief. The cavalry had finally arrived just in time to save them from a dark, terrible fate today. Baek stared closely at her own lieutenant in absolute, frozen shock. She simply could not believe her own two eyes. Minsu slowly turned his heavy rifle away from the angry guards and pointed it directly at his sponsor and commander with cold heart. His hands were incredibly steady. "Minsu, put that gun down right now," Mariong demanded, trying to sound brave. "You are my boy." Minsu shook his head firmly, a sad smile touching his dirty face. "I am absolutely done being your silent puppet," he replied, his voice echoing loudly. "You are a cruel monster. Seung-Jin and Latoya are my real family now, and I am here to protect them." Mariong's face turned bright red with pure, burning fury. "Then you will die with them," she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Fire!" Instantly, the clinic erupted into total chaos. A massive, epic, terrifying shootout began in the dusty lobby. Bullets flew wildly through the thick air, shattering the remaining glass and destroying the wooden desks. Seung-Jin quickly tackled Latoya and Marcus firmly to the ground, keeping them safe behind the thick, metal wheels of the giant prison bus. The terrible noise of the loud guns was truly deafening and very scary. The loud shootout finally slowed down as Minsu bravely forced all the bad guards to retreat outside. Latoya slowly stood up from behind the large bus tire, brushing dust off her torn clothes. She happily thought the terrible fight was finally over. But Baek was absolutely never going to surrender. Hidden behind a broken desk, the evil woman reached into her dark coat and pulled out a small, shiny silver pistol. She aimed the deadly weapon directly at Latoya's unprotected back. "If I cannot have the Empire, nobody will." Mariong screamed wildly. She pulled the tight trigger with a loud bang. Time seemed to slow down completely. Minsu saw Mariong fire the deadly shot. Without any hesitation, he dove through the thick air, jumping right in front of Latoya. The single bullet struck his chest hard, and he collapsed heavily onto the cold floor. He bravely sacrificed his own life to save hers. Latoya screamed out loudly in pure horror. Filled with intense, burning rage, Seung-Jin sprinted fiercely across the ruined room. He kicked the silver gun right out of Maryong's hand and pinned her firmly to the ground. The cruel, evil mafia boss was finally defeated forever. Exactly 1 full year had passed since the terrible shootout at the Bronx clinic. Many things had changed for the better. Baek was now locked away safely inside a dark, terrifying maximum security prison, wearing the same orange clothes her lieutenant once wore. Using her immense legal power, Latoya had completely dissolved the entire Choi Mafia empire. She gave all the dirty money away to charities and local hospitals, happily helping thousands of poor families in the busy city. Now there was no more danger or running. On a bright, sunny morning, Latoya walked barefoot along a beautiful, peaceful beach in warm Jamaica. The warm, soft white sand felt perfectly wonderful beneath her toes. The crystal-clear ocean water gently washed over her ankles. Seung-Jin walked right beside her, holding her hand firmly. He looked incredibly healthy, and his dark eyes were finally completely free of painful shadows. He smiled brightly, looking deeply into her warm brown eyes. "We finally made it," he whispered softly over the sound of the gentle waves. Latoya smiled back, resting her head gently against his strong shoulder. They had survived the dark storm together, and now they were totally, truly, and finally free. True power isn't found in money, empires, or fear. It is found in the courage to walk away from the darkness to save the one you love. Seung-Jin and Latoya proved that no matter how deep the scars run, redemption is always possible if you are brave enough to fight for it. They walked through the fire together and found their paradise, proving that love is the only force strong enough to break every chain. If this emotional journey kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and share this video with a friend who loves a thrilling romance. Did Minsu deserve a better ending? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next heart-pounding story. Thanks for watching.